Speaker, you want to do a blessing there real quick?
Can. Father, we come to you today in a humble way. We just thank you for the opportunity to serve our nation. And we thank you for keeping the safety shield around our people, dear Lord. Just guide and lead us so we make decisions for the betterment of our people today. Guide and lead us and bless this meeting. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well done.
Amen.
Denise Taylor. Here. Joe Deere.
Aye.
Keith Austin.
Here.
Harley Buzzard.
Here.
Joe Byrd.
Honey,
Julia Coates. Sean Crittenden.
Honey.
Mike Dobbins.
Here.
Kanan Duncan.
Honey.
Rex Jordan.
Here.
Daryl Legg.
Here.
Wes Snowfire.
Here.
Dora Petzkowski.
Here.
Mike Shambaugh.
Here.
Mary Bakershaw.
Honey.
Leo Smith.
Here.
Victoria Vasquez.
Honey.
We have a quorum.
All right. All right, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Motion to move. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, going to consent. If everybody's looked at it, the tarot, entertain a motion for this. Has everybody's looked at it?
Motion to approve.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Same. Community assistance?
Jody?
Printing the new list, so second. If you want to skip to another one, we'll.
Okay, we can go down. Law enforcement request?
Any changes on that, Jody?
On the law enforcement.
Okay.
Okay, the entertain motion?
Make a motion.
Second. Anybody?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
All right, roads.
There is a new list handed out, one for council, addition for Councilor Austin, and then a cancellation on, the project for Councilor Smith and Leeds.
Okay. You both, that's it? So entertain a motion for that.
Make a motion.
Second, anybody?
Second.
All right,
Motion is
all in
second.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, sports teams. We had some on the sports teams, so does anybody else anything to add? All right, so we'll entertain a motion for that.
Move. So move.
Second, anybody?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, livestock, I don't think we had any special projects. Okay, that's it.
We got community assistance handed out.
All right, so we're gonna go with community assistance. Do we have anything to add to Jody there? Mr. Counselor Keenan?
Jody, I got Impact Church for $1,000. That's for their summer lunch program. Then 900 to Stillwell Public Schools.
Anything in particular there?
Sorry, Judge.
Anything in particular on that one?
Insulation. Insulation.
Mr. Chairman.
Leg, Counselor Leg, do you have one? Anybody? Speaker Bird?
Hey, Gail, I thought we were going to do 1,000 on those churches.
I added them, they're on the back.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else have anything to add? All right. So we can get a motion on those to be approved plus the added. Okay. Second, anybody?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, takes down new business, Counselor Shambaugh.
This is an act amending legislative act number 15-19, authorizing a comprehensive operating budget for fiscal year 2020, mod 9, and declaring an emergency. I put that in form of a motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, ready to take a vote? All right.
I have discussion.
Discussion.
Okay,
on the
can
budget.
we, want to ask Trey. Trey, are you back there? Can you do a quick presentation on this real quick and then we'll.
I certainly can.
think it's both.
Here?
So would you like me just to go through kind of?
Just short, quick snapshot of it.
Yep. So this is the proposed spending plan for the coronavirus relief fund. Before I get into this, I think I'd like to say a few words, if that's okay.
Chief, you want to say something real quick?
Certainly. I just briefly, I know the council was briefed on this yesterday. It's certainly unprecedented times for the Cherokee Nation. This is an unprecedented opportunity for us to seize, and I think the plan that we have laid out, at least the initial contours, are a very good move, puts us in a good direction, lets us restore things, lets us reach out to the community where your constituents live and help restore them, and keeps us whole with the nation so we can continue to serve. We've operated at a high level during this crisis, and I think there's a lot of businesses, a lot of governments that weren't able to do that. We were able to do it because I think for a long time we've made prudent decisions with the resources that we have had. This is another example of a prudent use of those resources. We'll continue to keep the council informed. We'll come to the council with ideas, and we'll certainly welcome your ideas with how we proceed and fill in the details. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chief.
So again, this is just a little note to say that this is subject to change. Treasury is likely to put out some more guidance going forward. And as our legal counsel evaluates the guidance that has already been put out and their guidance evolves. Additionally, we have to stay on our toes because nobody knows what the virus itself is going to do. So as the virus changes, we need to be ready to react. So this particular plan is specific to a lot of people refer to it as the $8 billion set aside for tribal governments. And it's distributed by the U.S. Department of Treasury. The statute called for allocation based on expenditures of the tribal government, including tribally owned entities. Under the statute, we were supposed to get our funds no later than April 27th. However, there's some ongoing litigation regarding the eligibility of Alaska Native corporations, ANCs, as to whether or not they're eligible for distribution from this fund. So that's caused some delays. However, we did get our portion of the 60% of the fund, which would be our portion of $4.8 billion. We received that on May 6th, and that was in the amount of $332 million. Hopefully next week, we will be receiving our allocation of the remaining 40%, or $3.2 billion. Hope to have that in by June 5th. I did submit some information to Treasury. There was their second request for information. And we got that submitted a couple days ago by the deadline. Also, if the courts decide that the ANCs are not eligible, the amount that they've held back for them will be allocated out to the tribes. So this fund, I believe Speaker Byrd mentioned it in the previous meeting, this fund is a limited use fund. The uses of this money are quite limited under the statute. So in order for a cost to be eligible under this fund, it must meet all three of the following items. This comes from the statute itself. They must be necessary expenditures that are due to COVID-19. They must be not accounted for in the budget that was most recently approved prior to March 27th. And they must be incurred between March 1st and December 30th of 2020. A little bit more in depth on what those actually mean, and this comes from guidance that Treasury released. They released two pieces of guidance so far. The first was a document titled Guidance to States and Tribes, and that came out late April. And then they followed that up with a frequently asked questions page that came out early-ish May. So necessary means that in the best judgment of the government officials, that the cost is reasonably necessary to function the government. So that one's pretty broad. Due to just means that COVID-19 must be the cause of the expenditure in some way, and that can be either directly or indirectly. I've got a couple of examples of direct and indirect there, and these examples come from the guidance as well. And the direct expenses would be those made to specifically respond to the immediate threats of the virus. So PPE and stuff like that to protect the folks that have to be on the front lines. Second order effects would be those that are made to address more of the collateral effects of the virus, such as the current state of our economy. A lot of people are losing jobs, and a lot of businesses have had to shut down, at least temporarily. So secondary costs that would be eligible would be something like providing economic support to people who are suffering from unemployment, or to businesses that are suffering from business interruption. This is a pretty important one here. It states that the funds shall not be used to fill shortfalls in government revenue that would not otherwise qualify under the statute. So what this means is that we cannot use the funds to just directly fill our revenue shortfall. We can't just move them over and pay our expenses like we normally have budgeted. But what it does allow for is for us to basically comb through all the expenses that we did have budgeted. And if they qualify under those three prongs that I just discussed, then this fund can be used to cover those costs. There's on the not accounted for. So the statute says that the cost will only be permissible to reimburse those costs that were not previously accounted for on the tribe's most recently approved budget prior to March 27th. So if you take that on its face, it looks a lot like anything that this cost can only cover those things that were unbudgeted. However, Treasury in its guidance came out with some circumstances that state that these things, if these things are true, then we don't consider it accounted for. So the first one of those is the item where the cost is for a substantially different use than what it was budgeted for. I have an example in here, and it's not a true example, it's just for illustrative purposes. But that would be like if our education department had budgeted for a 3D printer that they were going to use in some kind of math or science class. And then when that printer came in, we were in the midst of a pandemic and we needed to repurpose that. So we sent it over to health so that they could make parts for a ventilator. So since that printer is now being used, that's a substantially different purpose from what it was budgeted for. So Treasury considers that to be a cost that is not accounted for, even though it did initially appear on the budget. And of course, that's still just one of the prongs. It still has to meet the other two prongs to be eligible to be a covered cost. The second circumstance that they describe here is that if the cost cannot lawfully be funded using the line item allotment or allocation within the budget. So under Cherokee Nation law, we have a statute that says that our expenditures cannot exceed our revenue. So basically that we can't operate at a deficit. So that means that even if at the beginning of the year, all of our revenue is a budgeted number, and all of our expenses are a budgeted number, and those although they're the best knowledge at the time, those change throughout the year, especially when things like a pandemic hit and our revenue drops, but our expenditures are still budgeted. Well, we don't have that associated revenue. We don't actually realize that associated revenue, so that means we don't actually receive that revenue. That makes it illegal for us to continue to spend those expenses when we don't have the revenue to cover them, because that would cause us to operate at a deficit. So because we have that law on the books, under this guidance, for those expenses that were budgeted but now don't have the associated revenue because of our revenue shortfall, those would be considered not accounted for. And again, that's just one of the prongs. It still has to meet the other two for it to be an eligible cost, but that helps us get to meet this prong at least. And this one is the cost has to be incurred between March 1st and December 30th. Treasury came out and stated that that means that the cost has to be expended prior to December 30th. Before Treasury came out with the guidance, there were a couple of consultation calls that the tribes were on with Treasury. And that was one of the things that we had asked for was that, what does that deadline mean? If it's budgeted at that point, does that count? If it's, encumbered at that point, does that count? They kind of came back and said, basically, that it has to be expended. So that means that appropriated and encumbered won't get us there. And it further went on to say that we shouldn't be just prepaying costs in order to expend the funds prior to the deadline. Unless that's something that's like a requirement under the contract that we have to pay for the whole year. So what that means to us is that all of these funds have to be spent by December 30th. So we've got a pretty short timeline here to spend these monies. And under the statute, this is subject to audit. Our use of the fund is subject to audit. Specifically, the Department of Treasury's Inspector General would be the one to come in and administer the audit. And any costs that are deemed ineligible or unallowable, we would have to pay back to Treasury. So that means that it is incredibly important for us to be documenting diligently our use of the funds. How they were used, why they were used, how that relates to COVID, how that meets the requirements under the statute and the guidelines. And as always, this isn't specific to this fund, but of course, there's no double dipping allowed. You can't use 2 federal dollars for the same expense. So if it's paid for with a federal dollar in another way, then it wouldn't be eligible under this statute. Do you want to pause for questions there?
I think it's a pretty good deal right there.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? Councilor No Fire, did you have something to say?
Yeah, on our last meeting, we had a budget mod for $100 million. Have we utilized any of that money already?
We have not booked anything to that budget yet. We have incurred costs related to COVID-19, but the way we have decided to do it specifically for preparing for an audit is that we talk to the departments first, kind of let them know that it's going to be an eligible expense or not. We go ahead and have them book that to their budgets, and then I have a team of accountants who is pulling that expense line. It's a new expense account that we made, COVID-19 expense account. The departments book it to that account, or that expense line on their account, and then my team is going through those, pulling them, gathering the appropriate backup documentation, making the appropriate notations as to why it's allowable, what the cost was and what the reasoning was, and then we're reclassing those to that budget. It's the same budget we're discussing today, the one we put $100 million in last time, and the money that's going in for that account today.
I guess so. I was asking, you have the authority to spend from that account though through this budget mod.
Yes.
So last month I asked, we see another budget mod come through because there was no line items on what, I know I don't expect to see line items because it's moving really fast and at some point I think we should, but there's $100 million that's already set in the account with no line items on where we're going to spend it at. And I know yesterday on our conference call we had so some restore, repair ideas of what we were looking at doing. So I guess my thing is there's 100 million sitting there. What kind of ideas can we project for the future for our citizens? I mean, 60% of this that we received so far was based off the tribal population. Council, we all have districts that we're responsible for. We all could use money in each of our districts to help out with that. Moving the money into the treasury account, it negates our ability we'd have to go back then and then try to pull the money. We could easily set the money, this $232 million or $1 million that we're putting in this budget mod, we could easily hold off on putting it there because they've not spent the $100 million yet. Give ourselves 30 days and look at a real investment plan of what we could do for our tribal citizens. I mean, if we've got a idea of creating a beef industry that not only puts a lot of citizens to work, it could also be feeding our own citizens with it. And that's the council. I believe it's our responsibility to include these ideas in with a plan, and along with the administration, they've done a great job thus far in responding to this. And I look forward to the more intensive plan that they have. But as far as the council's plan, I think that we could come up with our own plan as well and start making suggestions to how we could spend this money for our citizens. That's something that I think is important. We're not talking, I know yesterday it seemed like we threw 100 million here, 100 million there, 100 for that. That sounded, it's a lot of money. This could change the landscape of our entire nation if we can use it properly. And I know there's a limited time and it's a time crunch and it's a lot of money to spend in a short amount of time, but how could we invest it wisely as a council? I mean, where could our budget fall into this? Where could our 17 minds come up with some ideas? Do we need to look at taking a portion of it and hiring a tribal investment firm that could look out and take our ideas and interests? I'm sure $1 million in your district, Canaan, could help out a lot of people. How could you go about spending it there? How could you do that in Shamball's district? How could that happen in Sean Crittenden's district? Those are the kinds of things that, I think it's great that we're putting it in an account, but maybe the account can be held from being expended until we can have a collaborated idea and work together on where it could go. Because I know some of the discussions that was talked yesterday was about paying CNB back for the salaries that they've paid for. I don't know what their capital account was. I know that you worked over there, Trey Lena, in 2017, 2018, when we had $100 million in the capital account. That could have paid for those things, and I don't necessarily think we need to go run. There's not a bailout necessarily unless we've seen the numbers, which we haven't been provided with. I think it's great that Chuck Garrett and those guys over there, they've stepped up beyond most companies in the nation and made sure that our Indians that are being worked and provided the income sources for them. But I don't necessarily think that we need to just shove money over there or not have an idea of what we could do. This is a game-changing amount of money that we have sitting in front of us. And I think it's responsible for us as a council to come up with an idea of what we could do with it. Otherwise, I feel like we're just being a little neglectful with not coming forth with those ideas and working on a structured game plan. That's just what I had as a comment to that.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Dora? Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this situation, this money, this is more of an indemnity situation than a profit situation. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. This money cannot be used to replace any kind of lost profit.
Right.
It's only for costs incurred.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Duncan?
So that's kind of what I was going to get at too. It's for expenditures, particularly to COVID. So
If you could pull this back up, I can.
So on that note, let's say for example, Sean and I have given money to our community orgs through special projects for things specific to COVID. Can this money be used to kind of reload that special projects account?
Absolutely, Counselor, and I would like to add that that is actually part of the plan that we've put together. To your first question and to yours as well, Counselor, that, you know, it clearly says these are for necessary expenditures. And then it goes on to say that it can't be used to fill a shortfall, a revenue shortfall. So the intent of the government in providing this relief money was not to enrich anybody. It was just to help them with the costs that they have had to expend to keep their citizens and their employees and everyone else safe.
So it can be used to start a new business or something, you know, like, or a new industry?
No, it's not really necessary for those, unless it's an industry that you need, that must be started to respond to COVID. But on the plan, that's actually included in the rebuild section that we discussed. And if I could just run through maybe that really quickly. You know, our plan, as you guys know, is to respond, recover, rebuild. And in the response, you know, that's to, basically a good way to think about it is, you know, to pay ourselves back for what we've already spent to date. Because we have incurred costs, quite a bit of them. A lot of it, I would say the vast majority of it is keeping our employees paid while the businesses were closed, or for Cherokee Nation employees, it was sending everyone that we possibly could home. If you were over 65 or if you had one of the underlying health conditions, you were sent home, a lot of them on just paid admin leave. So that's another big cost that was incurred. The recover portion is a good way to think of it is the things that need to be done, that we need to do so that we can get our workforce back, we can get our government back operational, we can get our businesses back operational. You know, the businesses obviously back operational so they can start generating revenue again. Government back operational so that we can start providing, not that we never truly stopped, but if we get back to normal operations, that's just more services we can provide to the citizens. I mean, there is limitations when you have you're working on a skeleton crew. It's just a man-hours limitation. And then finally, the rebuild, which goes to your point, Counselor, is that this is the remaining amount of money, and it's going to be spent in the communities. It's going to be spent on services for citizens and investing in our communities to help them through the crisis as well. And specifically to your point, part of that is taking funds and setting them up for each counselor to be able to use those monies as a response specifically in their districts.
Thank you.
Councilor Egg, did that answer your questions too?
Yeah, I was going to say that everything that Councilor Nofire said has already been thrown out there as far as Chief is very much aware of the investments that we're needing in our communities. I stay in contact with him all the time about things that we could do to our community buildings, maybe make it a community/emergency response station, you know, and it's just, they're great ideas that he has. But it's something that's already been discussed and talked about, and it's in the plan.
Shambo, to answer your question?
No, I think there's a lot of merit in what you said if it can be done, but, you know, timing is an issue here because, you know, what we can spend money on and what we can is pretty cut and dried, really. But what we don't know is, you know, there's a lot of people saying there's a second wave coming, you know, and so the future is really kind of unwritten for us, but we have done well enough in the past with our casinos and our businesses that we are able to have been able to take care of our people very well, I think, you know, from salaries to food. I mean, just all these things that we do, but I really am would be nervous about not keeping some type of windfall. I mean, and how we invest our money, because this could come around again, and it's kind of devastating. Could be devastating if it does, because that's our livelihood, a lot of it. So I think those are good ideas, but I'm just kind of nervous about draining our money and not having it if we possibly need it again. That's kind of a scary deal. But, you know, when I read a lot of things on the internet and what other tribes are doing, but it doesn't sound, you know, and it's not legal to just give people money. And I know a lot of people are wanting that, but it's not legal. And, you know, and you guys have kept us legal ever since I've been on this council. You've done a great job of it. And I just think that what you're doing, we have some very smart people, you know, and Chief and his staff that have made great recommendations, and they have done what's best for our nation. And I just have to support that. I can't say enough good things about what they have done, and it's made it really easy for us to support what they're doing. So, my thoughts.
All right, so with that being said, Mr. Buzzard, Councilor Buzzard?
Just a couple of things I want to say, and I think it's a great idea to have council members to give input of what their communities need. Now, I'm going to give you a good example of what I need. We have looked to get some walk-in freezers to store fresh fruits that come from other grants throughout the federal government. We don't have any place to put them. To me, that's a good expense to do that, to buy walk-in freezers for community building. Another thing is, I had called up, I had an elder called me, called our clinic, needing masks, and he was 70, 80 some years old, and he couldn't get masks at our clinic. Now that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
This money is meant to give him a box of masks. No, they told me, no, we'll get somebody to make him some masks, but to me that's uncalled for to treat an elder like that. I don't like it, it still burns me up today to know that. Went up to our clinic and asked for masks. Couldn't get him. That is ridiculous. But those are just things that I see that we can help our people with. Now, going back to the freezer and walk-in coolers, there's grants that comes out, and I've seen Salina, and I saw Spavinall, and I saw over near District Canaan, fresh fruits. Well, if you don't have a place to store it, you've got to get rid of that today. So those are expenses I see, so I don't know. You know, I'm sure Mike Dobbs and some of the other people has ideas of what they could use in their community. So, and I haven't written these up and sent to the administration, but they haven't asked for them, but I think we need to do that. I think it needs to be out there for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Harley, we've already, some of us, I know other council I've talked to have suggested that to Trey, and that's going to be part of that later on, the suggestions like No Fire and Duncan and all these guys. And Trey's taken that all into effect. I mean, and she's compiling lists, like you said, with the departments. So with the finance part of it, the expenses incurred is what she's talking about.
Well,
but going forward,
they haven't asked me for a list of anything, but, you know, I guess I should have just volunteered.
well, it's just
Have they
voluntary.
asked you for it?
No, I'm proactive. I just go at it and tell them what I want and see if they can look at it, because I heard COVID expenses, that's a whole different thing, because I read the
Let me ask you
guidelines.
this question then, Councilor Deere. Do you think an elder should have to go up and ask for masks and not get them?
No.
Okay.
Trey?
If I might, maybe Counselor, that's in the plan. We've considered that, and that is something that we are intending to do, is to get some type of refrigeration, either permanently that's at the community buildings, or maybe a couple of different refrigerator trucks that can actually kind of
Can we justify
be
that?
mobile around to the different communities. I'm sure
You
that
just need to do all.
You can justify the beef industry.
That should be a given.
Justify anything like with it. I mean,
buying more PPE. We're maybe definitely,
We need a department
you know,
ag.
That should be a given.
I'm not excusing it, and I agree with you, but it may have been a situation in the beginning where we didn't have enough, we couldn't get enough, we couldn't buy enough, the supply and demand was out of whack. But we're getting more of that now, we're getting a stockpile to where that we could be able to do those things.
Still got time.
Well, I appreciate it, Fairland, because that just really got under my skin when I had an elder who was 80 years old, a cancer patient, went up and asked for a mask. I thought, well, at least they could give him one or two. No, couldn't give him anything.
And I do welcome all things, and I apologize if I haven't reached out personally to each of you yet. It's been a bit of some flood water, drinking out of a fire hose for right now, and we are though making our rounds to speak with each department to get their ideas, what they need, their projections of programs they can expand or add, and then in addition, you guys will absolutely, all of your recommendations will be taken in place.
Well, I certainly I want to thank you guys. You guys have done a good job. And I don't want to throw stuff in like this that, you know, we can handle, we try to handle it, but we have citizens that call us every day about other things other than COVID-19, and we still have to deal with it. I mean, it didn't stop. It didn't stop a person from getting their contract health payments paid. And so those are people that put the pressure on the council members. And I just hate to call down here with those things like that, because they should be taken care of without us having to make the call. But that's the math thing. I guess most really got under me. I just don't want to see it happen like that, and it shouldn't. Thank you for
I'm sorry
that.
that it did happen, and we are trying to get more of those so we can be sure that it's provided.
And I know the administration takes care of this stuff, and I'm trying not to put these things on.
Don't ever worry about buying me. Call me anytime.
All right,
I appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
all right, Councilor Duncan.
I was just going to point out yesterday, I think that on the call that we had about this, that was kind of the purpose. They asked specifically for us as counselors to give our input on different ideas of how this money should be spent.
I wasn't on the same call with you.
I know PPE was one of those. Was that gentleman able to get a mask, Carter?
What kind of happens when people volunteer in meetings and that?
Good. I was going to say
That shouldn't happen.
no, but I was going to say just if you get any more, I've had some people ask before for masks, and I've got with Chief of Staff here, and he's got them fixed up.
Well, the point of it is I'm trying to make is we sit here and we talk about taking care of our elders, and I have an 80-year-old person that go up there and ask for a mask and couldn't even get one. Now, would that aggravate you a little bit, Karen?
Yeah, it would, but what I would have done and what I've done before is go directly to Chief of Staff here, and he got a little Indian church there, and he showed 100 masks as they were resuming services. So.
Well, that's what we finally did. Some people made him some masks.
Okay.
We got them. But anyway, I just want to bring those points up and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
All right. Todd, you have something to say?
Yes, sir, if I might. And I'm sorry, I stepped out of the room to speak with some folks out there in the lobby, so I missed part of Councilor Buzzard's discussion. But I do want to apologize first, and I'll visit with our health team to make sure that they're extending this mask out to all patients and citizens that are coming in as well. As Trey Linda kind of indicated, we started trying to get PPE, essentially masks, N95s, and now these 3-ply surgical masks that most of us are wearing in the room today. And we actually got it before most. And I was kind of surprised that there were a lot of organizations that didn't. When I say organizations, some states that were weeks behind us on trying to acquire these. So right now, we are trying to ramp up enough inventory that we'll have 1 million surgical masks. So any person that comes into any of our properties will have a mask. And as part of the CARES Act and the things that we're looking at, to kind of try to shed some light on some of the concepts that we're looking at is these masks fluctuate in price and quality. And there are some knockoffs that are out there. And so we have to be very leery on what we purchase and what we acquire. But we are actually exploring the technology to actually generate the raw material that creates the N95 as well as surgical masks and surgical gowns so that we can create and produce our own mask. And we can become the supplier to all of our businesses, all of our government operations, and potentially serve the other tribes in the region. That's the kind of forward-looking things that we're trying to use the CARES Act dollars for, is not just some of the immediate needs, but also looking down the future. If there is a second wave, we don't want to be stuck in a supply chain issue. We want to be able to generate those ourselves. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. And I did want to say, if you guys have any suggestions of things that we should be looking at, we are looking at the roll-in freezers, the refrigerated trucks. And so this has exposed some holes that we have in our distribution systems that we see out there. So we are looking at that. If you have any additional, I would ask that you guys please email Tara Lee your suggestions, thoughts, comments, so we can get those incorporated into our plan. Thank you.
Speaker Bird?
Yes. Hey, Todd.
Yes, sir.
First, the elderly issue, and I won't beat it to death, what Councilor Bush said, that should never even happen. I mean, if a person has to go in and get a mask out of a box and say, here, I mean, that should be taken care of. Either that or that individual needs to go back and look at orientation a little bit closer. Okay, now moving on the freezers, if those community buildings, if they're in our name, then we can go and supply them with freezers. If they're not in our name, then we need to put them in our name because we don't want to be giving away freezers to non-Cherokee Nation properties.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just so you know, those freezers too, what we're looking at are not just the stand-up units. We're actually looking at the walk-in, roll-in, so that we could roll in a pallet of material and reduces our manpower to transfer stuff. And so that's the kind of things that we're looking at with those things.
And one more. I hate to bring this up, but I was asked to bring it up. We still have a handful of employees that have not received their debit cards. Okay? And to me, it is the responsibility of the individual, yes, but if the individual cannot make any progress, it is the responsibility of their supervisor. That's what supervisors are for. If I have a financial issue in my department, I'll call Jody. And if Jody can't fix it, we're in a really terrible situation. Now, there's a handful of individuals out there that have not received their debit card yet. They get that information, yes, you got this much in your account. That doesn't do any good. Those supervisors need to pick up that phone and call on their behalf and make sure that those individuals have their cards or what they need. I mean, a supervisor can't just say, well, I can't do that. That's a State Department. We don't handle that. That's not Cherokee Nation. Yes, they're still responsible because they're called supervisors, managers. You're in charge of your staff. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Someone out there needs to find out how many of our people out there still do not have their debit card. And I tried to get on the phone yesterday. It is a lengthy process. I mean, they'll run you around, they'll send you here, and you got to have address, Social Security card, and all of that. But if you stay diligent with it, you'll get that information. And a lot of our employees aren't capable of doing that. Yes, Chief?
Mr. Speaker, just to clarify, are these the C&B employees who opted into the voluntary furlough, and the issue is they're not getting their
Yes.
payment from the state? Okay, and we did make a provision for them to opt back in,
Right.
to avoid that.
Right.
But we can certainly visit with Chuck Garrett.
And it's a handful of those, but they did ask me to do, and I thought I'd present it here.
I just wanted to make sure, so yes, he's right, it's the C&B employees that he's speaking of.
Yeah, it's not the government side.
It says the employees that opted into the furlough because they were set to make more money under the furlough because of the provisions in the CARES Act. They actually were going to make about $600 a week more, or a month more. I'm not sure, one of those two. But so C&B is aware. I did have a discussion with those folks. They are aware of that issue, and they've set up a hotline so that if any employee is having a problem with getting their debit card or getting their payment from the state of Oklahoma, that they can call that hotline, and C&B will make sure that they remain on the payroll and that they do not miss a paycheck while they're waiting on any of the state, issues to get ironed out. So I don't have that number, but I'm sure that we can get it to those folks so they can call. It's an HR hotline, and HR will help them through that.
Yeah, I tried all those numbers yesterday. I did get response, but I wasn't going to do it for everybody. I just did it for one.
Speaker, I will say that I did receive a phone call from a unknown number to me, and it wound up being a C&B employee yesterday. It was about 4:30 when we spoke.
Yes.
He was having an issue with his claim, and I immediately contacted HR and copied Mr. Garrett, and they called him within 30 minutes of got it taken care of. So if you have any of those out there, please let us know. We'll
Okay. And my point was the supervisor still needs to follow up and say, is everyone being taken care of? Because they've got money. It shows they're getting money deposited, but they just can't spend it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilor Creighton, you you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna add to kind of what Harley was saying, that it really never should have got to Harley or anybody. Now, we've got great people working our health facilities, but it might just take a little team meeting before the workday starts, and just remind those, if they're answering a phone or if they're a doctor, just remind them, hey, if we've got an elder in need, don't just say no. Because I've had, I hate to put more on Todd, but like Kanan said, maybe some of those folks could get old Todd's number and, just make sure that receptionist just, you can't do that to an 80-year-old elder. Just maybe a team meeting. Hey, these elders, find a way, or call this. And I think, that could settle that just a little. Remind everybody does it. Customer service training, everybody. Not saying that they don't have good customer service, but everybody, me and everybody, could use a little reminder every now and then. So, but I was also going to say, in our discussions, man, one thing my old ear perked up, and when special projects was mentioned. So, if y'all could get us an idea, kind of what that's going to entail, I think that'll put a lot of our wonders about our own districts, a lot of our worries. If we knew kind of the plan, and we could be gathering things up in our own districts and be planning on how we're going to meet those in our districts. So if I know it's a rush and things going on, and I'm going to add to it that, wow, there's been some needs met, and I appreciate it. And just in the next, whenever you can, get us a kind of an idea what we kind of meant on that special project stuff, and that'll touch base with each of our districts.
Absolutely, I will follow up with more detail, but just in general, I can tell you that I've already started working with Cherokee, and any of the donations that counselors have made from March 1 through now, we're going back through there, and just for the audit purposes, again, we know that all of those donations were made for COVID stuff. So we're just kind of trying to gather the documentation, cover ourselves on the audit, and then we're going to be a lot like we have been with the departments when they have a COVID expense. It'll be reclassed, so we will do that with those funds that you guys spent during that time. We're going to reclass those over to the coronavirus fund, which will basically give you that money back, kind of refill that money. If we move that expense off, you have that money to spend over there. In addition, there's going to be, and I don't have an exact number yet.
Right, and I don't expect you to do that right now.
There will be amounts for each counselor for COVID related. I got to make that
Right.
caveat. The COVID, that the expenses still have to meet the allowances under the act.
And we'll have someone that can help us,
Absolutely.
that we call, just like Tara Lee, different ones, and say, hey, I'm looking at this, can we use it for this? And that'll keep us good. But yeah, I think that sets good with my old ear, is when I heard that. So just when you can get that to us, we can start scratching our head and
diligently.
see what we're gonna do.
My team and I are diligently working on getting more numbers associated with these various things. We are working with the programs to find out, getting their numbers in about, what kind of projects or things that, what kind of money they think they'll need, what kind of projects they can do, or programs, what kind of programs they can see in and stuff. And, it's just a matter of gathering data right now.
Right. And I can't say it enough, we just meet every now and then, but when there's a food need, a bunch of needs, by golly, we've been able to do it. So I want to thank the brains behind that operation and the different needs that arise. Of course, there's the day-to-day needs that we get all the time, the rent, the electric, housing stuff, and that's been met really well. So I appreciate you. Look forward to hearing about that.
All right.
Thank you.
Did you have something?
Is there one more kind of thing back to get more, and I think it's been great that we've discussed this. The last budget mod, we didn't discuss this. It was a clarification that I had that I thought we were going to get another budget mod coming forward whenever we had an actual account of where we were going to spend it, but that's not the case. And I think that things such as replenishing our accounts is great, but just more than $40,000, it could do a lot more than just replenishing those special project funds. I think the big thing that perked my ear, that just had my questions and concerns, was not having an account of what we're going to intend to spend on it before we made the budget mod. Like I've done said, we had the $100 million there. We've not spent it. So until we had a line item budget of what we think we're going to spend it for, we're going to give so much to council districts. We're going to do so much here, so much there. I didn't see it necessary to go ahead and just blindly move the money over with yesterday's conversation that there could be potentially $100 or so million used for C&B. That right there was something that I had a question. Well, how much did they actually incur on costs for covering salaries? Is it going to cover bonuses? I don't think it can. We also talked about the WMP because the C&B was going to build it and then they were going to give it to us. Now, apparently it's going to be becoming our burden to have to pay those things. And we got to get those things done. I'm not saying that we have to stall out any of those things. But is this money really intended for that? Because the money belongs, at the end of the day, to the citizens. And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Does it belong to the tribe or does it belong to the citizens? And where is that money going to affect the citizens? If this money is going to directly affect the citizens, then yeah, I vote for moving the money in a budget mod over, even blindly not knowing where it's going to go. But I think that it's better accounted for. If you've already got $100 million, you can be okay with for the next 30 days. We'll be back here to see what line items we've come up with, what you have come up with in your staff, and make the additional budget mod for the additional money going over there in that sector. So that way there's checks and balances on what we're doing, and we're making sure we're getting the accurate numbers from C&B to cover their expenses, and that we're also making sure that we have what we all feel might be very good things. This is all new. Everyone's coming up with new ideas as we're discussing this today, and in 30 days we'll have that many more. And I'm sure Chief and they've been great about coming to us with ideas and getting us the food that they need, that our citizens need. They've been really responsive on that, and I thank them for that. It's just more of a slowing down. Let's make a little bit more of an educated consensus view of the council. That's the only thing I suggest. But if we're doing this, that it's going to directly affect every single Cherokee, or is going to directly affect Cherokees and not be paid to a non-Cherokee construction company and be used to pay those things. But if it's for Cherokees, then yeah, I'll vote for moving it over there without those add items. But I would like to know in a more constructive way, and I don't see the necessary for the $230 million to go there today.
Was that it? Is that what you were talking?
Do you need the $230 million to go there today?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Even though we haven't spent the $100 million. Why do we need the extra $232 million today without any knowledge of where it's going to be spent when we still have $100 million?
So we have several expenditures that we need to move over almost immediately. Right now, my staff is going through and gathering the payroll data, and that will be the first big move. And those things will take big chunks of it. Additionally, C&B will be, and I can maybe hopefully tie some things back around for you. You talk about the affecting Cherokee citizens, and I can say that the way that providing relief, economic relief to C&B helps the Cherokee citizens is because, we give them the economic relief so that they don't become insolvent and close. And
are they in that potential right now?
They could be if we don't help
But
them.
have we looked at the numbers to see if they would be? Have they sent those numbers over?
I can go over those numbers with you. I don't have them yet. C&B is pulling together all of their actuals. And the way the program will work is that we will appropriate an amount that will be economic relief for C&B. after, I was waiting until today to make sure, this was approved. And CMB will send me their application, which says that they haven't received any other federal funds, and some other information that as the treasurer, I am responsible for ensuring that the use of these dollars is within the law. So they will send over basically an invoice, if you want to think of it that way, with all of their actual expenditures, what they're asking for reimbursement on. I will check that to make sure that those costs are allowable, and then I will send them the amount that they've requested, so long as it's all allowable. And then, so the first one will be what they've incurred to date. And then going forward, at the close of each month, they will do that again. So they will send me, so it'll be a drawdown of actuals.
Do they have estimates that we're gonna spend over, do we have estimates that we're gonna spend more than $100 million in the next 30 days?
I don't know, I haven't seen the amount, I haven't seen the invoice.
You haven't seen the-
What CB has requested to date.
They don't have an estimate, and you haven't discussed an estimate at all.
Of what they need, not what they need in the next 30 days, what they are projecting that they would need through December 30th.
Okay, so that's the thing, is that I would have liked to known what those next 30 days were looking like, because you already have the 100 million. I'm sure that there should have been a discussion on what access to funds they could have had to that now if they're in some sort of deficit. I hate racking my brain here, and I feel like y'all are probably looking at me thinking the same thing. I'm just going, man, why do you need $332 million today without any expenditure knowledge of where we're going to go? That's the only thing I had to say about it. So, Speaker Chair, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion by Shambo, and we have a second, so let's go ahead. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, announcements. Looks like the next meeting will be June 25th. Maybe, tentatively, we'll just go tentatively. Now get a motion for adjournment. Second? All right, all in favor?
Congratulations, Joe dear.